Hello, hello, NASCAR fantasy racing fans. Welcome to this week's edition of the Dan Beaver's NASCAR fantasy racing pit stop. I'm Charlie Turner. He's Dan Beaver down in Texas. Say hi, Dan.
Hi, Dan.
And we're going to be talking about the big Bank of America 500 night race at Charlotte Motor Speedway this week. And I think without any further ado, I know there's a couple of driver changes. And we probably ought to get that housekeeping out of the way before we talk about specific picks and advice here today. You've got Trevor Bayne, I know, who was one of your callouts on the On Pit Row show earlier this week as a good dark horse pick because he was going to be in, and now he's in the the sixth car now, right?
Yeah, he was going to be in the Wood Brothers number 21, and I thought he was a decent pick then. Being in the Roush Fenway number 6, I think actually makes him a little bit of a better pick because there is no doubt that that team will try to go the distance. They want to give him as much track time as possible, and the resources are probably a little bit better in the 6 than they were in the 21. Even though the 21, the Wood Brothers got plenty of support from Roush, it's not quite the same thing as it being your own car. And then the other one was we've had a couple of drivers moving around. Ryan Truex was listed in the 83. I wasn't 100% sure whether or not he really would be in it. They said he was out for the rest of the year, but you kind of had to hedge your bets. Now he is out of it. Looks like J.J. Yaley is practicing the car, which practice is going on as we speak, not on TV for some reason this week. And then that had a kind of a ripple effect, but not among anybody else that made too much difference. Yaley in the 83 could become a good bargain basement pick when we start talking about the salary cap game stuff. So that at least warrants a note.
Yeah, JJ's always been one of the big mysteries to me. He was such a great, and I mean great, open wheel driver before making the move to Cup cars with Gibbs Racing. I think was his first big ride in that 18 car, and man, he's just never been able to put it together. He's hung around and had rides most years, not really in very good equipment lately, but just a surprise to me.
Yeah, and there aren't a lot. Joe Gibbs, that organization is pretty good at identifying talent. Obviously, I mean, they've got a nice slate of drivers now, and Joey Logano, even though he didn't do what they wanted him to do because he got rushed into Cup too fast, they really haven't made too many missteps where the drivers are concerned. You can't think of a lot of drivers that kind of moved in and out of there.
The only other one I can think of is Jason Leffler, who had kind of the same experience that Yaley did at about the same time. He was the initial driver in that number 11 car and, failed miserably. Another standout open wheel driver, sprint car, midget driver, all those things. And, tragically died last year in a wreck. But it's funny that those two guys with this very similar backgrounds, Yaley and Leffler, failed with the same team that's been able to nurture these other young guys through the process. So somehow just didn't hook up. I don't know.
Yeah, and chances are
that's way off the topic today, but I couldn't help but talk about it.
Yeah, that'd be a good thing for the On Pit Row discussion later, but probably the same thought process went into both of those drivers, and the thought process was flawed to begin with. So,
yep. Okay, so we're going to Charlotte, talking fantasy or excuse me, talking salary cap games to start with. What's your advice this week? What's the best way to go on this deal?
Well, I think the two drivers we already mentioned here. You might want to start at the bottom because they're kind of clear-cut drivers to look at the bottom. Trevor Bayne would be one. I think J.J. Yaley is actually another one. He's got to be a bargain basement driver because he's shown up so little. So whatever the lowest amount is in most salary cap games, he's probably there. This team really wants to turn their program around, hence dropping their a driver that they felt wasn't performing. So we know that they're going to go the distance. We know that they're going to put as much into it as it possibly can. And that's probably not going to help too much unless there is some attrition. If there is attrition, however, then they're going to move up the order for that reason. You've got Brett Moffitt in the number 66. He's had a couple of really good runs, but where he had the good run uh, was more of a driver's track than this unrestricted intermediate speedway that relies on the total package. But at the moment, he's about 38th on the speed chart, so he's showing at least a little bit of speed. Casey Mears showing a little bit of speed. He's currently 30th on the speed chart, and we don't usually get to talk about things as they're going on, so it's kind of interesting to see that while we're getting a chance to chat. So I think you want to work from the bottom up here. Identify one or two bargain basement drivers that you think are going to be really strong. Then jump to the top. Look for your marquee drivers. The drivers with the best 6-race average, the last 6 races, all of them are chase contenders, with one exception, Clint Boyer. So the cream truly rises to the top at Charlotte, even though you will get the occasional dark horse. Over the long run, if you play the trends, you're going to be looking at the Jimmy Johnsons, the Matt Kenseths, the Casey Kanes. Those are the guys that are more likely to get and achieve and sustain those top 10 streaks. So look at the top of the speed chart. You're going to look for 10 lap averages. You're not going to be able to do that until tomorrow, Friday, when they get into race trim and make those longer runs. And you get your one or two marquee drivers, and then you get the best available driver in the middle. We've had a couple of good dark horses in recent weeks. Martin Truex Jr., Paul Menard, both finished in the top 10 last week. The Kansas-Charlotte double in the spring produced, I think, 12 back-to-back top 15s. So the drivers that finished in that 7th to 12th place range by attrition, in large part last week at Kansas, are probably still going to finish in that top 15 range. So that makes someone like Menard, Martin Truex Jr., even Brian Vickers a good value or a driver worthy of note. Then make that final decision based on practice tomorrow.
That makes a lot of sense. So who are the guys at the top you go with? I mean, who would be your pick if you're sitting with if you're holding? Let me throw two out there. If you got Jimmy Johnson and Kyle Busch, you happy with that this week, or what do you?
That'd be, and actually, that's not a bad thing to do each week. You come up with two drivers and see how they compare. In this case, either one of them is going to give you gray hair this week. Jimmy
Right.
Johnson, you hate to say that this is the one race that's going to make or break his season, because anything can happen next week at Talladega. But if he doesn't win this week, he's in a bad shape. By the numbers, Kyle Busch would be a much better pick, but he's had top 10 finishes in 12 of his last 14 races at Charlotte. But the 2 races in which he finished outside the top 10, he crashed and failed to finish at all. And that's always the risk with taking Kyle Busch. So if those were my 2 drivers, I probably, from a safe standpoint, would put Kyle Busch on the team, which seems counterintuitive, because you just don't know what's been going on with the number 48 team. Have they been experimenting? Did they get caught in a bad situation last week and they really are stronger than they've shown? Or last week running in the pack allowed them to get run over from behind? Is that really their prospect at the moment? Is that how good they could run? And we just don't know. Uncertainty is poison to fantasy owners. I'd much rather have a consistent driver. And in this case, 12 top 10s and 14 races, 2 crashes, makes Busch probably the more consistent driver than what we've seen from Jimmy Johnson in recent weeks.
So, okay, you don't like those. If beyond those 2 guys, we talked about them specifically, you've got maybe you're riding the 2 Penske drivers. I would think that would look good if you're holding those guys.
It would, except Charlotte hasn't been their better track here recently. They both make the top 10 in terms of 6 race average finishes, but only barely. And they both have finished outside the top 10 on average in those 6 races. So this could be a good week to just go ahead and let them rest, especially in games where, when we talk about Yahoo, this is a good week to let them rest because of the allocation management. But even in the salary cap game, you got to mix it up occasionally, and this might be a good week to think that they're top tens. It's hard to predict that they're going to finish outside the top 10, but top fives maybe are not as guaranteed as they seem to have been in the past. Instead, I'm going to look at Kevin Harvick. It's unlikely that he's going to have a week, 2 weeks in a row like he had last week. He played it safe, which was probably the right thing to do. Finished outside the top 10. That's probably not going to happen to him again. He's been fast. He's been fast all everywhere. And the one thing that will derail him is the one thing we just don't know. That's going to be what happens in the pits. Jeff Gordon, same thing. I doubt he's going to have 2 bad finishes in a row, although his 6-race average at Charlotte is well outside the top 10. He's had a couple of bad finishes, a couple of instances of crash damage. He lost a couple of laps to a penalty a couple of years back. So he's not error-free on this track either. And his best finishes in the last 6 races have been 3 7th-place finishes. But you can kind of throw his numbers out because he's having a career year. And I suspect he will be okay, but he's not a guarantee. Still, that would be one of my top 2 choices, Harvick and Gordon. Kez and Logano, hovering around the 5th place mark, maybe just outside of it. And then Kyle Busch should get a top 5 if you're willing to take that gamble. Jimmy Johnson should get a top 5, but we just don't know.
And one other driver you mentioned earlier in the show as a marquee driver is Casey Kane, which I would normally think of him as a marquee driver here. And he had a good run last week at Kansas until his incident. Casey Kane, Matt Kenseth. They earlier in the year, Kenseth was one of your primary high value drivers. Is he still there?
I don't know. No, he's not still there, although the numbers haven't changed significantly. He entered Kansas with a 9-race top 10 streak on similarly configured mile-and-a-half tracks. The worst he had finished all year on this course type was 10th at Chicago, but he just looked anemic. Did not get out of the gates, did not show us much at Kansas, and I just don't know if that team's got. It certainly doesn't have what it had last year, and I don't know if it's got what it takes to finish in the top 5 with any kind of consistency. So I've soured on Kenseth a little bit. Kane tends to rise when he needs to. He's not in quite as bad a shape as Earnhardt, Keselowski, and Johnson, who crashed last week, but he's still pretty far down the list. He's got some ground to make up. He's got at least 8 positions to make up while he fends off those 3 drivers I just mentioned. So his best bet is to win. His best bet is to try to finish in the top 5, and his 6-race average finish here is just a little bit worse than 5th. So he's got the numbers here. Last week, though, Jimmy Johnson and Matt Kenseth were in that same position. They had an average finish, I think, of 5.17 in their 6 most recent races at Kansas before the Hollywood Casino 400. So they're in exactly the same position that Casey Kane is right now, and it didn't help them out. So there's you got to worry about Kane if you're the superstitious kind of person, but should rebound. Kane should be a good value. He's been uneven enough that a salary cap is probably manageable. So Kane fits as one of those drivers that you're going to want to watch closely in Friday's practice. Not doing too good right now on the speed chart where top end speed's concerned. He's only about 20th, but we don't know who's working on what since we're not watching it.
Well, before we change games and go to the Yahoo game for the second half of the show, any final thoughts on any last minute tips you can give to somebody with a salary cap game that we didn't talk about so far today?
Remember that Talladega is coming up next week. You're not going to want to move really expensive drivers on or off your roster when that happens. So if you've been thinking about a Dale Earnhardt Jr. and he fits right now, he might be someone that is good to put on your roster just in case the salary cap managers of the game bump him specifically for the plate track. Otherwise, just kind of realize that whoever your marquee drivers are this week, you'll probably leave in place next week and behave accordingly. You're not going to want to overspend next week, but there's also not a lot of rationale to take good drivers off your roster just to fill it entirely with dark horses. But those dark horses are going to be there next week.
All right, good stuff. As always, you can read Dan's written advice on fantasy racing at yahoosports.com every week. He does an extensive, big article about the Yahoo game and then another one about qualifying. Those, I assume the base story is up already for the week?
Yep. It goes Tuesdays.
Tuesday. And then qualifying article will be, of course, a little bit later. And then also Dan does another set of unique content at rotoworld.com. So make sure you check him out over there. Bookmark those pages so you can refer to them week to week and do your research before you make your picks in this terrific game of fantasy racing. And then also, if you haven't already subscribed, Dan and I have a joint project we put together called On Pit Row Magazine, which is an iOS app, which you can download on iTunes, the App Store at iTunes for free. It's a free app. If you subscribe to the magazine, you get 2 months free of the magazine, which is at least 4 issues. Going to get you almost through the end of the season at this point. So get over there and check that out. There's some also unique fantasy racing content that we update weekly on our magazine. We're real proud of it. So check us out there. All right. So we're going to the Yahoo game. Where do we start?
Doesn't matter. Start with A, B, C. B usually is the most difficult, so that's where you're going to put most of your thought process into picking. But might as well start at the top and just work your way down. Jimmy Johnson is a little more attractive there, probably, than he is in a salary cap game, in large part because he struggled so much that players have not exhausted him. You've got to kind of assume that this team hasn't forgot what it takes to be a championship contender. Last week, no one could predict, last week's getting involved in a crash was not part of their plan. They should not have been racing where they were, but that happens, and now they're going to have to rebound. I wouldn't want to bet that they don't rebound. So Jimmy Johnson is a good, solid pick in Group A. I tend to be a little superstitious. If you watch Twitter, look for the hashtag BeefJinx, and a lot of my drivers don't do nearly as well as they're supposed to when I put them on my team. It doesn't mean that the rationale behind most of my decisions are usually pretty darn good, if I say so myself. But once I activate them, it's poison. And if any of the NASCAR teams are out there watching this, I can be bought and encouraged not to on my team. There's got to be a way to turn this tendency to jinx these guys into a profit center, but I haven't figured it out yet. So if you see that Jimmy Johnson's not on my provisional roster and I'm saying good things about him, there's a reason for it. I believe those good things, but I also believe that if I put him if I activated him, he'd crash. So, but Johnson, this is a make or break race. He doesn't know what's going to happen. No one knows what's going to happen next week at Talladega. Right now, the focus has got to be on this week, this race, and he has to try and win. If he doesn't lead laps, something is seriously wrong with this team. We said it at Dover. He didn't lead laps, but he did finish third, so kind of pushed the decision off a little bit. But if he doesn't lead laps this week, if he doesn't contend for the win, then something's seriously wrong with the team. And if something happens next week, or if they don't win next week at Talladega after finishing 40th or whatever it was last week, they're probably going to be out of it. So this is a make or break race for them. And this is a team that should be able to rise to that challenge. Kevin Harvick, Jeff Gordon, we already mentioned when we were talking about the salary cap games, the things that I said there still apply here. They're good drivers, and it's a little easier to spread your allocations around in Group A. So chances are you have sufficient allocations for those two drivers combined that if they're on your roster, you can activate either one of them just based on who looks the best in practice on Friday, and that's the driver that you want to start. Kyle Busch, good dark horse at this level. And the only reason he's a dark horse is because of his propensity to crash, overdrive, when the car's not handling right. But he does have a perfect sweep of the top 10 in the chase, so he's done a pretty good job of staying out of trouble so far this year. Jumping down to B, I think this is a good week to rest Keselowski and Logano. Maybe even at this point, you've already made your decision. They're either on your roster or they're not, provisional roster or not. If they are, then hope that your other two drivers are drivers that you're comfortable starting. And I wouldn't even think about starting Keselowski or Logano this week, just because you're going to need to use them again. We've got another similarly configured mile-and-a-half track coming up at Texas. Logano specifically has also been good on the short flat tracks. We've got Martinsville and Phoenix coming up. So you're probably going to use him up in one of those three races, if not all three, if you've got three allocations. So it's kind of a good week to leave him off because we've got another couple of good choices in Group B. What I said earlier about drivers doubling down in terms of top 15s at Kansas and Charlotte identifies some really good dark horses. So if you read the preview and you took some of that advice and put some of those dark horses on your roster, a Martin Truex Jr., a Paul Menard, a Brian Vickers, even a Jamie McMurray, who was running fifth before he cut a tire with less than 10 laps remaining, those drivers are probably going to finish close enough to Keselowski, Logano, if Keselowski and Logano finish in the top 10, if they don't have any struggles, that it's worth doing the allocation management play. Also, bear in mind, Logano has no incentive to do anything but test for Texas here on Saturday night. There's no reason for him to necessarily play it safe, look for that top 5. He could go for broke where the win is concerned, or he could support his teammate with some help. Not meaning that he'd throw anything in the race, but practice a weird set of setups so that Keselowski's got something to choose from, because this race means so much more to Kes than it does to Logano. So it's a good reason to overlook, maybe to push Logano out of the top seat. Then you got the rest of the normal set of cast of characters. Carl Edwards, Ryan Newman did well last week. They should do well again this week. So they have a good shot at getting top 10s. And in Group B, a solid top 10, a top 15 is acceptable, so long as you get those with some consistency. So then we drop down to Group C. Larson is the driver most likely to finish in the top 10 again. He keeps getting close to winning, and if you look at the history of this track, first-time winners here have been pretty darn impressive. You've got David Pearson, Buddy Baker, Jeff Gordon, Matt Kenseth, all got their first victories at Charlotte. It's not out of the question.
And the great Michael Waltrip in his All-Star race.
Yep. I'm thinking of Cup races, but also not so great David Rudiman. But you get a nice mix here. And nothing against David Rudiman. He's a nice guy. But you've got a really good list of first-time Cup winners here. Jamie McMurray in his second race overall?
Yeah, second race.
Racing Sterling Marlin.
Yep. Yeah.
So some drivers who went on to be pretty important to the overall mix. And that was a Chip Ganassi, Felix Sabates car that Jamie McMurray got his first win in back in the day. So Larson could get his first win. If you're down to a couple of allocations, you're deciding where to start him this week, and at Texas might be good times to do it. But I've said all along, and I still feel this way, Dylan's going to finish closer to him on the unrestricted intermediate speedways than he does on other courses. So it's a good time to start Dylan. Still plan it out, look and see what you've got, how many allocations you've got remaining. Personally, I have 4 allocations remaining for Larson and Dylan. This might have been a week that I took Bain in order to make sure that I ended the last 4 unrestricted races with those guys and I could run the table. But I feel good about Larson. I'll probably start him, and I figure Bain will show up again, or someone's going to show up again to give me one more shot at something else. So Larson this week, Dylan probably at Texas, and then I'll figure out what to do with the other guys so I can run the table with those 2 drivers. If you're not in that situation, Danica Patrick does well on the similarly configured 1.5-mile tracks. She belongs there. So your choice boils down to Larson, Dylan, if you have sufficient allocations, or Patrick, Bain, if you don't. And Patrick, it's kind of a it's a coin toss. I think they both will finish somewhere in the teens, probably in the mid to high teens, versus potentials for top 10s for Dylan and Larson. But that's probably close enough at this stage of the game to make them a good allocation management play.
All right. Simple. Nothing to it, right?
Nothing to it. At this point, it gets to be a little bit more simple because you really are making the best of the opportunities you have. You've allowed yourself to remain. So you know what you've got. You know what tracks are coming up. Don't worry about Talladega. Do whatever you got to do with dark horses there. You've got 2 short flat tracks. You've got 2 more similarly configured 1.5-mile tracks. And then you've got Homestead, which is kind of unique, but it's a 1.5-mile track that kind of fits in that other category. So you know what you've got, and you know what is coming up, and it's pretty easy to do the math at this point.
In past, this is a little bit off, but in past years in these races during the chase, I think it's almost always been a good play to play drivers that are in the chase. They seem to have most of the finishes, and there's a reason for that. They've been the best racers most of the year as well. This year's a little bit different, I think. Don't you agree? I mean, with this new format, it has totally kind of tossed that around.
Yeah, we still don't know exactly what these 3-race formats are doing, and this one's not going to help us out much because of the tire problems at Kansas and the wild card nature of Talladega. This 3-race segment round is not going to be the same as the first 3-race round. The next one's going to be significantly different because you're cutting the field in half. You're going from 8 drivers to 4 drivers. So the demands on those 8 drivers that make it through are going to be different than what we've seen. I want Talladega out of the chase for so many reasons, but it would also be nice if it was not in this group of 3 so that we could see what each 3-race group looks like. NASCAR is not going to do that for us, so we have to make some assumptions, and we're going to go into next year probably with a lot of unanswered questions still, and I think that's by design. NASCAR doesn't want us to have all of the answers. If they did, we'll think it's boring, and maybe the fan would. Fantasy handicapper doesn't. Boring's good from my standpoint.
Yeah.
But yeah, these 3-race mini chases, they're changing a lot of things, and I think that's part of the reason we saw drivers like Dale Earnhardt Jr. and Brad Keselowski cut tires. They could have been playing with air pressure or camber. We just don't know. And if they did, they were doing it because Talladega looms, and they felt they had to get off to that great start. So Talladega is going to have an impact in more ways than one.
All right, that pretty much winds it up this week as we wind up Dan Beaver's Fantasy Pit Stop for the 2014 Bank of America 500. It'll be Saturday night. First practice is going on right now as we speak, so you have to go to J-Ski or one of those places to monitor speeds. It's not on TV. I don't know when the first TV coverage starts today. I didn't look it up. I should have probably done that. But any final thoughts? I'm sorry, go ahead.
For the Cup Series, the first thing we're going to see is qualification at 7 o'clock Eastern. And we are done. Practice is done. Kevin Harvick won it with a speed of 196, 192. Austin Dillon, Tony Stewart, Jeff Gordon, and Kurt Busch round out the top 5. So we got Harvick and Gordon up there, but Stewart's a bit of a surprise. This could be the week that Stewart gets back.
Yeah, that would be interesting. And 196, it's going to be fast.
It is.
All right. He's Dan Beaver. Follow Dan on Twitter if you're not already at Fantasy Race. Follow me at On Pit Row, and make sure you check out our On Pit Row magazine on the iTunes App Store. Download the app; it's free with your iPhone or iPad or iPod, and check it out. We'd like to hear what you have to say. Leave us some reviews and some ratings, and chime in on our Facebook page or get a hold of Dan on Twitter or me on Twitter. Let us know what you'd like to see in that magazine. And we'll see you next week when we get ready to do Dan's favorite race, the Chase race at Talladega. This is where we have a big. This is where we have a big hat, and we put the names in there. We take all the good drivers out of the hat, and you pick your teams from what's left. Right? That's a preview of next week's show.
Yeah, I'm starting to feel sick before next week's show. Just to let you know.
It's all right. We won't hold it against you. All right, that's it, folks. Thanks for joining us this week, and we'll be back next Wednesday, 3:00 p.m. Eastern time, to talk about Talladega. Thanks for joining us.